mean, because it's very subjective, but I think that it is going to be a descendant of a wood ape would be the likeliest candidate for what these animals are. We've always heard about the Bering Strait land bridge, but just so you know, the land bridge existed in the Pleistocene period 2 different times. It was 1,000 miles wide, and it was first believed that if those kind of animals came over, that they may have been chasing Arctic game. Well, now we know that for a long period of time that 1,000-mile wide bridge was forested, and we have found remains of other animals here on this continent. One example is the red panda, which is more a cat-like animal, so the panda name is a little deceiving, but they found bones in Tennessee in 2000. The bones were estimated to be about 4 to 7 million years old. They were doing a highway project. It was the Gray Fossil Site in Johnson City, I believe, in Tennessee. And that's just one example of an animal that did come over. But you look at Gigantopithecus, and we're talking about something that we only know exists. They existed for over 1 million years. And this is Blackie that I'm talking about. There's I believe 3 or 4 different Gigantopithecus, but Blackie would be probably the most likely Bigfoot candidate. We have a suitcase of remains. I mean, we've got a couple mandibles, molars. We've got a couple hundred teeth. I mean, you literally can fit it all in one suitcase. And we have those remains. They were found in 2 Southeast Asian caves, limestone caves, and likely carried by porcupines into that cave. And the original assumption was that they were primarily herbivores for several reasons. Number one, they were found next to giant panda remains, which fed on bamboo, but also the jaw for the mandibles. It would be a tough fibrous vegetation that would be, and they found within those teeth microscopic vegetation. So they know that they did eat vegetation. But now the question, and I know Meldrum brings this up as possible omnivores, and through some of the microscopic pits in the teeth, they know now that they also ate nuts, seeds, and fruit, and now it's being argued possibly meat as well with those microscopic pits. That's kind of a recent discovery that we keep getting. The timeline is getting lower and lower. We're now down to Blackie being the last about 100,000 years, which is really not much. So those are just some facts, as far as when you're talking about Gigantopithecus as a candidate. I'm looking here on food sources. And these are just some of my subjective opinions from being out in the field the last 6 years. And I kind of tend to think that there's possibly more of these animals now, and believe it or not, because of the human manipulation. We always think wherever we've encroached, people worry, if these things are real, there's a good chance they're going to go extinct, or there's a psychological boundary that where we've been, these animals can't cross. You hear people react to that all the time, and really being out there and seeing how the other animals do with some of our manipulation it's totally untrue. And I want to take clear cuts for an example. What you've done with a clear cut is you've essentially allowed an area of light to penetrate, which in turn is going to produce a lot of undergrowth, vegetative undergrowth. That's a food source. A lot of berries grow in clear cuts, and deers come and they feed off the sapling. All ungulates come and feed off those saplings. So you've created this biodiverse environment where you've forced all of this food congregation that's more predictable congregation of food sources. And you have it on the vegetative side and on the meat side. So I would argue, and being in a clear cut, I mean, God, I've been in so many, even looking across a clear cut on a sunny day, I look at it as a perfect prey capture window for an apex predator, because you've also got the guardian of the sunlight to protect you too. You can also watch the human activity and easily not be seen. I mean, you're going to blend right in. On a sunny day, you can't even see past the first set of the tree line. So another example would be roads. People believe where we have roads. I've been on these logging roads, and I know, I'm sure you have too, many times, where might see one truck, fish and game guy, logging truck, one a week, a couple a month, whatever. Just think of an animal that size if you can get from point A to point B without having to negotiate thick, steep terrain, how much less of a caloric intake is it going to be over the long haul? So, you know, and we see most of our sightings are on roads, road crossings. You know, it's not like if the animals have the acute senses, it's not like they can't hear or hear the car or see the headlights a mile away. You know, I almost think that possibly some of those sightings are on purpose. And you know, we look at, let's take black bears for example, and we'll use California as an example. Right now, anyone know how many black bears are in California? Anyone want to take a guess? The state, the last 20 years, the black bear population has grown ridiculously. We're up to about 35,000 now back in California, with 25,000 in the northern counties. I mean, I go to Northern California, there's some places I can't walk 5-10 feet without seeing bear sign. But you got to remember, those black bears, that's 25,000 if we just take Northern California. They're not feeding on ungulates. That's 95% of that diet for that 9 months that they're out. That's primarily vegetation and insect diet. So they do just fine. So I think the food source argument from skeptics, I think, went out the window quite a while ago. A lot of people just don't know how to argue it. So that's why I wanted to bring that up. I also want to talk briefly about misidentification. You know, the leading candidate to be misidentified would be a black bear on its hind legs, which we all know don't stand on your hind legs very long. They will get up either to be on a tree to leverage for grubs, to better discern something or smell something. They will for brief periods of time. They do not walk across meadows. They do not walk in front of cars. You know, and a lot of people want to explain the sightings away, but they take away the point that most of the sightings, it took place in enough time that the witness clearly saw something on two legs. So basically, I think it's patronizing a lot of the witness to sit there and try to justify that they may have seen a bear. I think you're better off just calling them a liar than using a bear as an example. And then the other thing that I never understood is why would somebody rationalize an unknown, quote-unquote, mythical animal to explain their unknown animal event if they're unsure? See, I would think, from my interactions, I would think it would be the other way around. And let's do a reverse psychology. I think we'd all agree here that most animals are heard more than they're seen, right? I mean, especially at night, you don't see the animals. I would argue, if the animals hypothetically exist, I know they do, but how many people have had a possible Bigfoot encounter and would just chalk it up to an animal that they can identify and rationalize with? So it's just something to think about.